Okay, let's get started. Well, my name's Martin Gill and a very warm welcome to our 20th Security Thought Leadership webinar. And this is where we've organised a set of webinars in order to debate the quality of security we have now in order to get a better type of security in the future. And what it is crucial we do is that we critique what's going on now, particularly in a time of crisis when security is at the forefront, to ensure we maximise the potential to get a better type of security in the future. And our topic today is rethinking security education and training post-Covid-19. What changes do we want and what can we expect? And we've got 4 experts from around the world, each of them involved in different types of education and training, different types of security. And what I'm going to do in a minute is I'm going to invite each of them to introduce themselves. And once they've done that, I will then invite each of them to make their opening statement. 3 minutes on the theme, their views and thoughts, and then we'll come to you for questions. So can I invite you all, please, on the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen to ask your questions there. Do get them in early. We found from experience it can get a bit action-packed, so get your questions in early and I'll endeavour to include them. So let's go to our panel and we'll start off in Canada with Dr. Glenn Kitteringham. Glenn.
Good morning, everyone, or afternoon, or whatever the case is. Dr. Glenn Kitteringham, CPP with Kitteringham Security Group.
Thank you very much indeed, Glenn. Let's go over to the United States and Kevin.
I'm Kevin Peterson, CPP. I am an independent consultant in risk management and also an adjunct professor at Webster University in security management and the program lead for that program.
Thank you very much indeed, Kevin. Now back to the United Kingdom and over to Terry.
Hello everybody, I'm Terry Hanley. I'm a Director of Security with a company called the Interserve Group, who are a provider of facilities management services.
And for someone at the sharp end to someone who thinks about this rather well and rather a lot, Professor Alison Wakefield. Alison.
Hi everybody, so I'm Professor of Criminology and Security Studies at the University of West London, and I'm also Chairman of the Security Institute, which is the UK's largest professional association for security practitioners.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay, so I'm now going to ask each of our panel for their opening statement, just 3 minutes, when they get the chance to offer their views on this topic. So let's go to Glenn. Glenn, your opening statement, please.
So just by way of background, I wrote my doctoral thesis on security guard training back in 2017. I'm currently co-authoring a chapter with Dr. Declan Garrett entitled Security Training for the forthcoming Handbook of Security 3rd edition to be published in 2021. I've been teaching in class since 1995 and online for the University of Calgary since 2008 and the Justice Institute of British Columbia since 2010. So regarding the how does education and training need to adapt, first I want to clarify the difference between the two terms. Education is that broader cognitive big picture overview to build both knowledge and intellect, whereas training deals with both the development of specific skills. And what I really think needs to happen is not so much that training and security or training and education needs to adapt, is that people need to adapt. Unfortunately, we are still in an unregulated world, and more people, and there always seems to be this focus on security guards who need training, but training is mandatory for a lot of security guards in a lot of jurisdictions, but no other levels. And I find this problematic. I personally think that security is too complex to not have training and education at every level. And unfortunately, we also live in an industry where people say they're are experts because they simply say they are. So following up on this, so in the areas, the new areas of security, the training and education that people are going to need, I believe, fall into both what we call the soft skills and the hard technical skills. The soft skills need to be expanded upon. And this is advanced communication and negotiation skills, emotional intelligence, or interpersonal leadership, continuous learning, teaching and training. And going back to the hard technical skills, I think an area that we're currently falling down in is in the area of technology, and it dominates our industry like it dominates every other industry, and that people at every level of the security, right from security guard to CSO, they need training in how to use this technology. And one of the, whether face-to-face training is over or not, I think it may have been somewhat temporarily suspended, but we can still see training going on in small groups. But I do think that there's this huge push for this migration to the online learning environment. And I think pretty much any skill that can be taught face-to-face can be taught online, as long as the trainer has got the appropriate tools and that the instructor is completely engaged. And finally, whether the renewed case for harnessing the links between education and training, I think what's currently missing is a clear career path route for people who want to work their way up the ranks from security guard to CSO. And Dr. Declan Guerin, who I mentioned previously, wrote about this in his thesis back in 2016 and about the lack of career pathing. And he pointed out it's difficult for people to make a plan to work their way through their career. And so we've been working on this, and we're developing a clear career path. And I think that it's also valuable for universities and private institutions alike to develop for their students and for their employees alike a clear pathway for their employees to progress. And there's, contract guard companies have hundreds, if not thousands, of employees, and they should be tapping into them to be able to, make them, to give them the options for them to move their way up the ranks. So that's
okay, Glenn, thank you very much indeed. I'm now going to go over to the States, and Kevin Peterson.
Well, first of all, amen to what Glenn said. I really appreciate that. I kind of looked at this issue in terms of education in three ways, in terms of what our objectives are, what our content is, and what our delivery is. And in terms of objectives, I feel that over the past 20, 25 years, there's been sort of a move towards academic education being more focused in our world, in the security world, on the practical, the applied sciences, rather than, and a little bit away from the theoretical and the research areas. And that some people feel that's fortunate, some people unfortunate. What COVID-19 did actually is conflicting, I think, because in one way it'll reinforce that need for practical applied education. What do we do? How do we respond to this in an actual business, in an actual organization, as a security team? And that aspect of education will be really emphasized, I think. On the other hand, I think COVID-19 also brings in will bring in a whole new emphasis on research. How do we deal with these ambiguous and dynamic risks that change? What we're seeing with COVID-19 is this is an issue that's changing before our eyes day to day. So how does a security staff, a security director, chief security officer deal with these constantly changing threats and risks? So that'll require research, and I think this will kind of spur a new private partnerships in the research field, and involving a lot of opportunities, I think, for universities. In terms of content, again, in our security field, I think we have seen these, this might be a little controversial, but I think we've seen these kind of temporary shifts in emphasis on what we're kind of focused on. For a few years, we might be kind of really focused on workplace violence. For a few years, we might be really focused on terrorism. For a few years, we might be really focused on natural disasters or intellectual property theft or whatever. So we see these shifts, and COVID-19 in a way is going to cause a shift. And I think that shift will be towards a very heavy emphasis on business continuity. However, that shift is not going to be one of these temporary shifts. It's going to be a sea change. It'll be permanent. So we're going to have this permanent emphasis, I believe, on business continuity and, how do we react in a business environment to allow an organization to continue operating in this kind of situation. And that's going to be, I think, a very, very permanent emphasis in security education and assets protection education. And it's not just emergency or crisis management, it's true business continuity. How do we continue to operate? And how can we be creative in continuing to operate? And that need for creativity is going to take us back to that need that I mentioned at the beginning in research. So I think we're going to have a lot of evidence-based and a lot of research efforts focused towards business operations, organizational operations in this kind of dynamic risk environment. So I think that'll be very different. One of the other things I think this is going to do is kind of going to bring together some areas that have been going on, sometimes go off in different directions. What are the needs of the businesses or the organizations or the employers versus what are the desired skill sets in the workplace versus student demand? What do students want to learn and what are they going to pay for to learn? And then finally, how are the educational programs structured and what do they focus on? And I think this a new emphasis that I see in business continuity will bring these together, because business continuity is going to be something that the businesses and organizations and employers focus on, that there are skill sets that are needed. And the students are going to be interested in that, and the educational programs will facilitate that. So I see that kind of convergence of those areas that in the past have been a little, off in different directions. So I think that's a good thing.
Kevin, just very quickly, if you could sum up now, please. We're getting tight.
In terms of delivery, obviously we're moving a lot towards remote learning and online, but I don't think that's completely the wave of the future. We have a lot of opportunities for both online, but I think we'll always need that hands-on learning as well. So, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm now going to go to Terry Hanley back in the UK. Terry, over to you. Your opening statement, please.
Okay, so I think I'd like to start by agreeing actually with what a lot of Glenn and both Kevin have mentioned. I think that the response that our frontline sort of colleagues have put out with COVID-19 has actually been nothing short of magnificent, actually. Which leads me to sort of believe that a lot of the training that we've had in place up to this point in time, combined with some good positive attitudes from our frontline colleagues, has really worked out very well, certainly in the experience that we've had across the UK. I think also that that doesn't obviously solve the challenges that are there. I think that we all do recognise what they are. I think that in the UK, obviously, we have a regulated man guarding sector. I think that there's some challenges around how we actually adapt that mandatory training that's going to be required for frontline operators, either to join or to progress their skill sets. There's certainly work that needs to be done in identifying career paths and suitable and sufficient sort of training and support mechanisms for people to identify those and to develop. I think that it's that the response is going to be needed across the entire sector. And so from a guarding perspective, for me, being able to provide people to customers who are knowledgeable, confident, can adapt, are flexible, able to sort of take on different skills as things change as rapidly as they do in the workplace, is going to be essential. That's going to need to be supported by our trade associations, I think. We still haven't, I don't think, in the UK yet, identified a really good, solid foundation for people to come into the sector and to progress. I myself started as a security officer way back in 1995, and I think just through sheer, bloody mindedness as much as anything else, have had to sort of force myself into different sort of training packages, whether they be practical sessions, whether they be more advanced through sort of, some pretty solid sort of educational packages. But that's not available to everybody at the moment, I don't think. and we need to do more around trying to identify that. I know that lots of the trade associations are looking at sort of developing that with regulators. I know Security Institute, for example, with the Chartered Security Professional status. You know, there's lots of work ongoing trying to identify that. But at a practical sort of frontline operator level, I don't think there's a great deal. I think also from our sort of entry level, I think now we have something like 3 days is the quickest you can get through your guarding license training today. You know what, you get that training once in what the licensing came in 2004, so that would be the only formalized training you might have had for 15, 20 years, you know, so that is your career training. It's 3 days. It's not sufficient. I think also we're going to need greater support from equipment manufacturers and suppliers, particularly when we get into the software packages and the software suites around AI. You know, some of this great product that is coming to the fore now with camera technology to support sort of queue management, you know, temperature measurements, and all of these different kinds of services that are and products that are now available. I think as employers, we've got to do more. We are obviously very much driven by the sensitivity of cost, you know, and the competitive nature of getting out there into the market. But you know, we've got to demand that there is a baseline standard that is you know, sufficient to give us some good operational knowledge, whether that be with one employer or with another. You know, we do have sort of labour laws in the UK that allow you know, great sways of security operators to move from one contract to others on sort of win or loss. And of course, you know, they you know, you can have a group of very capable people coming in that could very well be left to sort of you know, make their own way again, if you like. So I think in terms of the educational journey. So again, we've got to do much more as employers. And finally, I think as leaders or those in leadership positions, you know, we've got to demand that these professional standards are introduced, and we've got to make sure that they are maintained, you know, through you know, procurement, through application, through the practical stages, all the way through to, you know, some really advanced training that you might get as you get further into your career.
Terry, thank you very much indeed. Just to remind the audience that if you could use the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen in order to ask questions, and we'll get to them as soon as we've heard from our final opening statement. Alison Wakefield. Alison, over to you.
Hi Martin, and thank you very much for having me. I'm just dialing in on a mobile at the moment, and I'm trying to fix some IT in the background, so I may disappear and then reappear, but hopefully it's fine for now. You know, you've asked a range of interesting questions in the abstract for the session, and just to get some of those points rolling, which I can come back to. I think the current crisis has seen lots of exciting routes to learning appear that we haven't had available before, and organisations like both of mine, the university and the Security Institute, has had to start doing things differently. And it's amazing what innovation we've seen just around the sector. So, you know, numerous cheap or free, you know, like this one, free opportunities for learning, discounted options that a lot of providers have offered, and newly adapted techniques that we've learned in the last few weeks. So you know, I think it's a very positive time for education and training, and also something that's really worth focusing on for those who may have downtime at the moment. We've seen you know, just about every type of event run online at different degrees of formality, different times of day. And I think one of the most important aspects of what we've seen is it's going to be getting people over the hurdle of starting to engage with online learning who simply haven't done so before, because of the investment of time and money that requires. And having stepping stones into e-learning, I think, is exactly what we need, so that people know what to expect, and if they find they get a lot out of it, they can progress to the next level, you know, as a lot of security practitioners have done, and you know, some, in the case of Glenn, for example, going right through to doctoral level. So for me, that's just one of the most fantastic benefits out of all of the difficulties that we've been facing. And if it's a route to people then progressing to vocational and educational qualifications and certifications, that's fantastic. We'll be talking in a bit more detail about the new areas of learning that there'll be an appetite for. But just thinking about perhaps what's needed, if you look at the publications by the likes of the World Economic Forum for what they call the fourth industrial revolution, we're entering a world where more in the way of critical thinking and complex problem solving skills are going to be required, because you're dealing with complex interconnected risks, you know, and related to that, you know, we need intelligence, we need political and security risk analysis, whether it's doing it ourselves or for senior people, hiring people to do those jobs, or contracting those kind of services. You know, we must be more mindful and forward-looking when it comes to risk, but risks are not straightforward anymore. They are, or they can be, complex and cascading. As like Glenn, I'll be writing a chapter for you later in the year for your handbook of security with Mike Gibbs. We're going to be writing about professionalism for the fourth industrial revolution and what that means for all of us. You know, going back to the crisis over the weekend and what we've seen in the United States with the death of George Floyd and the unrest. Sorry, I just had a blip there, an IT issue. You know, we need better crisis leadership, you know, and right through to the front line, better critical thinking skills. So, you know, how do we address that is a key point. And I think we will see more of a blend between face-to-face and online delivery, so what we call blended learning in the trade. And we'll hopefully see more use of recognised prior learning, which is where people can have stepping stones into education by starting with vocational courses and qualifications and getting credits awarded on the strength of what they've done, to then be a gateway into higher education qualifications if they decide that that's the route forward. So those are some of the exciting developments and opportunities that I see in the current landscape.
Thank you, Alison. Thank you very much indeed. Well, let's get straight to our questions. We've got a lot of them. So I'm going to ask our panel to be succinct. I'm going to start with you, Kevin. And you mentioned research and you mentioned teaching. Sandy Davis asked the question, a former panelist actually. How can we possibly create a security officer educational program without understanding the role and responsibility and job complexity of these officers? In other words, the lack of research in this area is actually getting in the way of doing anything credible. I'll ask you first about security officers. I'll come to Alison and ask the same thing about security managers and executives. Kevin, security officers and up to manager.
That's a huge and long-standing issue, because there is no, I think as Glenn mentioned, there's not really a consistency of standards, requirements, training, and in order to define those, we need that research. So Sandy's absolutely right, is that we can't just throw something together. If we want to standardize and make things more consistent, we need to base that on research as to what's needed and what works. Absolutely. Okay,
and Alison, same question to you, but perhaps at a higher level, the same point exists, doesn't it? We talk about getting educational qualifications and etc., but we lack the research on which to base it.
Yeah, so I think we're thinking about both contents, you know, what is the content of training, but also, you know, what are the courses, what are the standards, and I think we have to remain flexible, as we have done in the sector to date. So, you know, just for example, when we were creating the Chartered Security Professional qualification, there were two possible routes in terms of thinking about, you know, reflecting content in particular subsectors within security. So if you look at what the Register for Security Engineers and Specialists do, they have qualification through various pathways. And so you pick a pathway and you show that you're qualified in that pathway. With the Chartered Security Professional, we wanted to recognise that diversity. And so we came up with a common framework, which was based on the Engineering Council's model for Chartered Engineer. And it's a competency-based approach that can be applied to any sector or subsector within security, recognizing that we're not doing the same things. And actually, in a complex world, we can't, you know, you have generalists, but you need the specialist. And as the world gets more complicated, that becomes more and more the case. So the Chartered Security Professional, through competencies that are about knowledge and application, and you know, we have 5 competency dimensions, and every candidate has to demonstrate the same competencies. You have got a framework that works for a field that's incredibly diverse. I mean, if you compare us with the police, we do all the functions that the police do and more. So there's private and public sector versions of, you know, the absolute breadth of functions. Something that Dave Brooks, Associate Professor at Edith Cowan, has written about in his various publications on the knowledge base in security. So I'm sorry if I'm...
Alison, just sum up if you could, because I want to move on.
Yeah, so I'm not going to advocate a single pathway and say that we need a model that reflects that diversity across the sector.
But I mean, let's come to Glenn next. Glenn, Mark Baldry has asked the question and saying that the trouble is security career pathing doesn't exist. And his point is, how can we begin to change this? I'm going to come to Terry afterwards. I know Terry's been thinking about this issue in his company. But therein lies the problem, Glenn, the lack of any pathway. We know that. How do we change it? Glenn Kitteringham.
Well, I would start by saying that we create a draft document that identifies the various positions that exist generally. I mean, we're not going to capture every security position out there. It's too complex. But there is a path from guard to CSO, depending upon complexity, guard duties, task responsibilities, areas of responsibility. And again, it goes back to the point that Sandy's made, which is it has to be research-based. And I mean, there are some documents out there, like the Chief Security Officer document by ASIS International that talks about tasks and duties. But he's right. I mean, the document currently doesn't exist, and it needs to be built, at least a draft, and then it needs to be tested and expanded upon, and we go from there. I mean, you create something and you figure it out if it works or not, and then you fine tune it.
Here's the point, Glenn, because we talk about a career path not existing, and maybe that's the wrong word. I mean, it very clearly exists. It's just not structured in the same way. I mean, the fact that people can go from security officer to chief executive. We had one on the Richard on the panel a couple of weeks back. The path there, isn't it? It's not structured in a direct route. Very quickly, if you wouldn't mind, Greg, because I'll ask the same question.
Sure, it exists, but you have to find your own way. you could call that a self-selection process. People are self-selecting themselves out or self-selecting themselves in. But right now, there's very little work that's going into helping people make decisions about staying in the security industry. And just, I think the one thing where we fail as an industry is to let people know that this is a viable career. We don't.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to come to Terry Hanley. Terry, same question to you. I mean, we talk about there being no career path, but I mean, Glenn's point that there's definitely one there. You've got to go and find it. Well, what's wrong with that? It's there. Terry.
You could look at it in that way. Absolutely. I think though that as you sort of develop into sort of higher levels of operating, you're going to have to be able to demonstrate levels of competence and understanding of some of the issues that you're going to be faced with. I think that's that particularly today with the nature of complexity that is out there. We have, if you just look at the broad range of skills that you might need, just to get from a security officer sort of entry position to that of a management position, there are so many different things that you have to learn, and you cannot master all of them, I don't think, but there are some core competencies, that you're going to have to be able to get around. And I think it's down to us to try and identify what those might be. And I think that they would be common, and I think they will be common across the sector, if you like, or the industry. And that would be whether that's in, there'll be local issues clearly and sort of local regulation that you have to consider, but things around counterterrorism, for example, are going to be the same here as they are stateside, for example, or throughout Europe. So there are going to be core competencies that you're going to need to understand, and I think those are the things that we've got to identify, and we've got to help.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you very much indeed, Terry. I'm going to come to a question from Mike Cummins here, who's a regular contributor to these panels. He asked a really good question. Kevin, your thoughts first. His question is, given the budgetary constraints that security will face post-Covid-19, how would the panelists suggest how security leaders prioritise training needs and be creative in showing an ROI for the training to have a better chance of funding? That strikes me being right at the heart of this subject in reality. Kevin, your thoughts on that, please.
Oh, that's a tough one. First of all, I think that we may well see in a post-COVID-19 world sort of a bump in funding like we did in the States after 9/11. So I think funding for partnerships, for research, for education and training is probably going to see a boost, at least temporarily. But then in terms of prioritizing it, I really think that the more we can show a benefit to the organization of well-trained, well-skilled security professionals, and the more we can actually use metrics to demonstrate that, I think the better off we'll be and the better business case we'll have towards providing support for training, education, and advanced skills. So.
Okay, Glenn, same question to you, but very brief if you wouldn't mind.
Sure, I think particularly that contract guards should focus on reducing their turnover, and the money that they're currently spending in hiring and rehiring and interviewing and uniforming and temporary training. If they could cut their turnover in half, they could take that money that they're saving and plow it into training, and they could probably increase their training budget without actually spending any more money. The money's there already. They're just spending it in the wrong areas.
Terry, the money's there already. You've got to cut the turnover. Your thoughts?
Yeah, it is a challenge. I would agree. I think that is a tough one to solve. I think though that we have demonstrated as an industry certainly that we have been very adaptable. Through COVID-19, we've got some really good examples of some really positive actions that people have taken. So the mindset's there. I think we've got to identify though what actually we are going to be required to do to support the customer need, whether that's going to be the way that we manage queues of queue management, people coming into office spaces or facilities, the way that we might search, the way that we might manage conflict. You know, there's all of those different things. We've got to try and identify what those aspects are, and that's the area that I think that we've got to focus on at a sort of an operational level for our man guarding people.
Terry, thank you very much indeed. I'm going to come to you with a tricky question, this, Alison, I've got to say, from Gary Shields, but right up your street. He mentions the chapter you wrote in the Handbook of Security, which both you and Glenn mentioned earlier, and we're doing the 3rd edition now. And he mentions that there are various elements you've written about, Alison, with regards to establishing security as a profession, competency standards, training, education. One of the points he wants to raise is, do you think the bodies, the professional bodies, the ASIS, Security Institute, and many others, the regulator, are going to actually be active in promoting this post-COVID-19? Is COVID-19 going to make a difference to this agenda? Your thoughts, Alison?
Are we going to try and do what we currently do better? I guess, is that the question?
Well, the danger is that the reverse could be true as well, I suppose, with cutbacks. I mean, what difference is COVID-19 going to make, if any?
Well, I mean, it's very difficult to see at the moment how it's affecting our market. In the Security Institute, we've got more people than ever coming in, although a lot are coming in through government bodies, through partnership arrangements. I think certainly the professional bodies are getting a lot more visibility at the moment because a lot of people are at home. There's a lot of activity. You know, I'm finding that we're engaging from people around the world more than ever. So, I get a sense of, a coming together around the mission to professionalise. May I ask if others get the same sense at the moment?
Well, let's ask. I mean, Kevin, would you say there's I mean, you're quite attached to ASIS, for example. Would you say there's been a coming together to answer this question, a sort of a mutual support that's going to last, Kevin?
I don't think we can tell that yet. I do see that. Hopefully it will last, and it'll again be sort of a change in society in terms of our professional associations. And I really do see a great opportunity for different specialized associations to kind of come together and collaborate a lot more.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I've got a message for you, Glenn, I think, here from Jen Siofi. I do hope I pronounced that okay. And the question is, Glenn, do you feel that pursuing a PhD is a worthwhile investment for corporate employment? Glenn?
Oh, that's the $1 million question. I don't regret at all doing my PhD. I very much enjoyed it, but I did it for myself first. It is a grind. It was an absolute grind. And I don't do it for anybody else. If you're going to do it for yourself.
Alison, I guess I'll put the question to you, but you've been at the forefront of pursuing PhDs for professionals around the world. Is it a good financial investment? It's going to get them a job at the end. Very quickly, if you wouldn't mind, Alison.
Oh gosh, well, you were right to refer to Glenn first because he's the person that's done it. Yeah, I think it is what you make of it, because it doesn't lead to, immediate doors opening up. You have to promote yourself and you have to show what it's brought to you. So, people like Glenn are still publishing and researching and showing what the doctorate has brought them. So I think, like anything, you have to harness what you've learned and get the best out of it.
Fair enough. Let me come to Terry. Terry, Peter Hale, basic job training to obtain the SIA license is just supposed to be the beginning of the process. And it's up to business leaders to take responsibility. I mean, this is, there's no excuses here. This is about what we already know the circumstances. We know what we've got to do. Industry, get on with it and stop blaming other people. I mean, I'm taking Peter's point and exaggerating it, but Terry, we know what we've got to do. What's the barrier to progressing here?
I don't know that there are specific barriers, so to speak. I think that what COVID has shown us is that we're able to really sort of adapt and be flexible with some of the challenges that have been faced at all levels of the industry. I think though that what we do have to do, yes, I agree that the regulated trading is the sort of baseline into it, but you still got to invest, you still got to demonstrate that there is going to be progression in the industry to make the industry more professional. You can't just leave it that we'll teach this person once in their career how best to search a person, for example, and then leave those individuals to sort of get on. We have, as employers, absolutely got an obligation to ensure, and I think that we do in many cases demonstrate that there are opportunities for learning. But when you come to specific core competencies, they've got to be considered by all members. Whether you're a buyer, whether you're the regular, you've got to make sure that those core competencies are there, particularly when there's so much shift and change in the sector. I think you have to do that.
Terry, thank you very much indeed. Then a very quick question for you. Well, the question's going to be the answer. I'm looking for a quick one, and it's actually about Erica is asking about how we can get the same sort of emphasis on security, education, and training in places like Africa, as there's been in other parts of the world. And I mean, it's a big question, Glenn, but it's a real challenge, you see, because on these webinars, we've had people from Africa say, all very well for you lot, but it's very difficult here, and there isn't the money and the funding. Any thoughts on ways of progressing that? It's a tricky one.
I don't even know how I could answer that. I agree that you could argue that this is a luxury. Training is a luxury. I don't know what else to say.
Well, I mean, I guess the point is you've been at the forefront in sort of taking courses abroad. And I mean, I wonder whether there's a case for more of the West doing the reaching out for parts of the world.
So an organization, I'll do a plug for Sandy and IFPO. I mean, International Foundation for Protection Officers. There is distance education training, and that is a terrific opportunity. And that is a relatively low cost investment in education and training. And I'm biased obviously towards the CPO, but I got my CPO 20 years ago. I think it's a fantastic program, and I think it's a fantastic investment. That's a good beginning for all people to take in the security industry.
Maybe that's a topic we come back to all of its own. Thank you very much indeed that for Erica. Well, let me come back to the panel then and ask them to sum up just in 20 seconds, if you wouldn't mind, each of you, your headline thoughts on what needs to happen to make education forefront a core issue post-COVID-19. Kevin, just 20 seconds, please, your thoughts.
Okay, going back to my point on business continuity, I think that needs to actually be integrated into every security discipline, not just stand on its own. So as we integrate it into other security disciplines, we can take more of an enterprise security risk management or ESRM approach, and then that approach will be filtered into our education and our training and spread. And I think that will be a great benefit to the community.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Glenn, 20 seconds, please.
I think we need to take security from being a commodity to that of a profession and recognize that it is a complex series of tasks, and you need training to do it properly.
Glenn, thank you very much indeed. Terry, just 20 seconds maximum, please. You're on mute, Terry. Terry, you're on mute.
I would agree, sorry, I would agree. I think it's a question of continued investment, but it's continued investment from all levels to ensure that that pathway is there and supported.
Terry, thank you very much indeed. And final comment, how appropriate for Alison. Alison, just 20 seconds, please, your final thoughts.
Okay, well, we can't serve everybody, so I guess I'd like to refer to three groups. Those working on the front line, the next generation, and those working in global South countries, like you mentioned. So, certainly trying to normalize progression on the front line in ways that that Glenn advocates in his work. You know, so thinking about that sector, we're only going to transform.
5 seconds, Alison, we've got to go. Sorry.
Okay. Well, I'll leave it there, but I'm happy to explore those issues more fully.
I agree. We may have to come back to it, but thank you very much. Thank you very much to all the panel for their insightful comments and very, very interesting, actually. And what is crystal clear on this issue of training is that we need to get our heads around the type of training and education in the future that we're going to want, and the thinking needs to start now. So my very grateful thanks to the panel. Thank you to you for asking the questions. Just to let you know that if you'd like to think about pushing the organisation forward, this whole world of security into a new dimension, what we need to do is identify those who are outstanding at what they do. This is where the OSPAS comes in. Nominations are open around the world: India, US, Benelux, Kenya, Romania, Australia and the UK. If I could encourage all of you, please, just to make one nomination each of someone who you think's outstanding in one of those areas. And to say we go through it all again on Thursday, when we'll be talking about security in high-risk environments. What are the challenges and opportunities of operating responsibly? And here we are in a time of crisis. What's happening in those high-risk environments? What are we learning? That'll be our topic on Thursday. More planned for the rest of June and into July. Every Tuesday and Thursday we'll be with you. Once again, my grateful thanks to the panel for their insightful comments. My grateful thanks to all of you who asked questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to them all, but we appreciate your input. My thanks to Hannah and Christine in the background who've been orchestrating all this. And wherever you are in the world, stay safe.